Hello and welcome back to Glitterature Alley. I am Tootight Lautrec, the Master Mistress of Glitterature Alley, and here we are once again at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have two contemplative lions sitting on the front steps, perhaps contemplating the subtly gorgeous book that we'll be looking at today for Pulitzer Who, The Edge of Sadness by Edwin O'Connor, which was published in 1961 and won the 1962 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. We got here by gingerly skipping past the last book that I discussed, The Travels of Jamie McPheeters by Robert Louis Taylor, and then hopping right over Advise and Consent by Alan Drury, the 1960 winner, even though the movie that was made out of it, the Otto Preminger movie starring Henry Fonda, Walter Pidgeon, and Burgess Meredith, had the first official portrayal of a gay character in a gay bar. So we'll skip right past that. We'll wave politely to the 1961 winner, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And this brings us to The Edge of Sadness by Edwin O'Connor, the 1962 winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Before we look at that, we'll consider some other books that were published in 1961 that did not make the cut. And there are some pretty heavy hitters here, so I'm just going to hit upon the heavy hitters and keep the list to a bare minimum. There was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, Clock Without Hands, which was Carson McCullers' last novel, Dawn by Elie Wiesel, Franny and Zoe, Be Still My Beating Heart by J.D. Salinger, Ombre by Detroit's own Elmore Leonard, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy, Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates, and The Winter of Our Discontent by John Steinbeck. But the winner of the 1962 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction went to Edwin O'Connor's The Edge of Sadness. Edwin Green O'Connor was born July 29th, 1918, and he lived until March 23rd, 1968. He was born in Providence, Rhode Island, to an Irish Catholic family, and he attended the Jesuit University, the University of Notre Dame, flourishing under the tutelage of one of Notre Dame's most popular and most influential instructors there, a man named Frank O'Malley, who, by the way, is no relation to anyone we know here, but a very nice name all the same. In fact, The Edge of Sadness was dedicated to Frank O'Malley. So after college, O'Connor moved to Boston and began a long career as a television critic in two Boston newspapers, and sort of barely scraped by until the second novel that he wrote, The Last Hurrah, made a bit of a splash on the literary scene in 1956. And I think then it was made into a movie as well. The Edge of Sadness was his fourth book, and it's about a 55-year-old Irish Catholic priest named Hugh Kennedy, who is a once disgraced but now recovering alcoholic, who finds himself pulled into the family drama of a family with whom his family was once very close. I was, in fact, hoping that my sister Mary Rosebud, here, I was hoping I could lure her away from her perch somewhere out in the Outer Hebrides at the cloistered convent of curious souls, Discalced, to come and help present this, considering that there is an Irish Catholic priest here and she may know something about that. But sadly, she stood barefootedly steadfast against the idea, and so the task falls to more men. So Edwin O'Connor was a TV critic, a novelist. He also wrote a children's book, and additionally, he wrote a play called I Was Dancing, which unfortunately did not go over very well. The New York Times said of that play that it showed the defect to which the novelist turned playwright is liable. It talked itself into failure. Ouch. But we here today are not going to be discussing Edwin O'Connor's failures. We're here to discuss the very successful book, The Edge of Sadness. And this is how it begins. This story at no point becomes my own. I am in it. Good heavens, I'm in it to the point of almost never being out of it. But the story belongs, all of it, to the Carmodys, and my own part, while substantial enough, was never really of any great significance at all. I don't think this is modesty. It seems to me a simple fact. Because now that it's all over, and I can look back on all those weeks and months, not with detachment, of course, but with a somewhat colder eye than before, I have the feeling that whatever happened would have happened whether I had been on hand or not, whether I had spoken or been still, whether I had known the Carmodys all the days of my life or had met them for the first time one sunlit afternoon in the middle of last week. Still, there is this. I was at least there. The friend of the family, the invited intruder, the small, necessary neutral cushion against which all belligerents might bank their shots in turn. I was there, as I say, and there I stayed. I stayed with the Carmodys and their story from the first, from that Sunday in June when old Charlie Carmody, saluting the one day of the year which could be counted on to move him deeply, gave himself a birthday party. And I hope you can tell just by the calmness and the somewhat wry uh, way in which this story begins, the tenor of what we'll be experiencing as we get through this book. So the narrator is one Father Hugh Kennedy. As I said, 55 years old. He has no family left. He's modest and contemplative and somewhat beaten down by life, announcing himself as a first-person witness to something, which we will find out through the course of the novel. And this device in fiction of a first-person narrator who is a witness to another person's or a group of people's story, if it's not done well, it can feel manipulative and become actually kind of annoying. But when it's done very well, for instance, in The Great Gatsby or in Sophie's Choice, it is highly satisfying, as it is here. This first-person observer, this distanced first-person observer, serves many purposes in fiction. It announces an interest in what will be happening throughout the book. It introduces a sense of anticipation. It establishes the voice of the novel, and here the voice is thoughtful, modest, and observant, and it's filled with the narrator's awareness of his own limitations and his fascination with human beings and human behavior. In fact, when asked about how he was able to write so many different kinds of characters, O'Connor once said that I'm just interested in human beings. I just listen to them and put it down. And put it down he did indeed do in a most excellent fashion. So the story is that Father Hugh Kennedy, as I said, a 55-year-old pastor of a down-and-out parish called Old St. Paul's in an unnamed New England city, gets a call from Charlie Carmody, who is a charming but ruthless businessman and slumlord who happens to be a childhood friend of Hugh's own now deceased father. Hugh's father, in fact, described Charlie as fine a man who ever robbed the helpless. So we get an idea of this wry sense of humor that is threaded throughout this book. Hugh grew up with the Carmodys, and two of the Carmody children, John and Helen, have become or did become Hugh's best friends, even though he has distanced himself from the entire clan for years for reasons which we learn a little bit later on as the novel proceeds. So John Carmody is also a priest, and he is in fact the pastor of the lively parish in which they all grew up. It's the parish that in fact used to be assigned to Father Hugh, from which he was disgraced after this slow, steady slide into severe, non-functioning, blackout alcoholism during the aftermath of his devastation and depression at his own father's death. So Hugh was relieved of his duties and sent to dry out at a Jesuit facility in Arizona called the Cenacle, which was set up for just such a purpose. He stayed there for 5 years, and when he was deemed suitable to return to priestly duties, the bishop assigned him to Old St. Paul's, a few neighborhoods away from the parish which he grew up in a rather down and out neighborhood. And Father Hugh himself describes Old St. Paul's as a spiritual watering hole, a halting place for transients in despair, which seems to also include the new pastor. So Hugh has distanced himself from his friends out of shame, and this call from Charlie Carmody sets in motion an uncomfortable but necessary re-entry into a community of sorts, into life, and into Hugh's reawakening as a person and as a priest who can at least be useful, even though his inclinations are to be an introvert and to shy away from the world. So Hugh goes to the party, and over the course of the novel, he reacquaints himself with John and Helen. And I have to say that the love between these friends is one of the most beautiful depictions of friendship that I have ever seen in a novel. They speak frankly, honestly, forthrightly, sometimes too powerfully, honestly, to one another. And the trust and love and the connection that they have with one another is so beautiful. And it's probably the thing that keeps this novel near the top of my list in many, many ways. So after that initial birthday party, something mysterious does happen where Charlie, the ruthless slumlord father, continues to call Father Hugh and seems to want something from him, but he never fully articulates what it is. And so everybody, Hugh, John, Helen, all of them are wondering why it is that he continues to call Hugh, but never spills the beans on what he actually wants to know. The cynical John believes that it's because Charlie wants to acquire Old St. Paul's and tear it down so that he can build some sort of cheap housing development for himself. But we don't really learn until page 300 the real reason behind Charlie's calls. And over these 300 pages, we get a poignant picture of Hugh's shame, his loneliness, his goodness, and his desire to be useful, even in the throes of lassitude and depression. Now, a book about sadness and depression may not seem like what I call a fun read, but this book is actually quite funny. It's wry observations about the ridiculousness of human beings and the really joyfully absurd things that they do and the turns of phrase that O'Connor uses to describe them make it a really fun novel to read. So you may ask what kept me reading or what stopped me reading. Actually, I was riveted the entire time. The main event, or what is set up as the main event, this secret about why Charlie keeps calling Hugh, even though it doesn't come to fruition until page 300, it's fully satisfying when it does, when we do find out the real reason for it. It's emotionally satisfying and it's thematically satisfying as well. But the real main event of this book is Hugh's struggle with himself. He is a priest and he should extend himself to his parishioners, but his main impulse is to hide and to retreat, and Old St. Paul's seems to be a perfect place to do this. A little too perfect, as we see in a really devastating and shatteringly dramatic scene between John and Hugh toward the end of the novel. It's almost a test of their friendship, this scene, and it's I was in tears. I'll just say that. Um, you may also think that perhaps a book about a Catholic priest might be a bit God heavy or overly or overtly religious, but this book really is not. If anything, I would say that it is human heavy in the best possible way. So, qualms. Do I have any qualms about The Edge of Sadness? Zero. Zilch. Nada. Nunca. I have no qualms at all about this book. It may, in fact, be my number one pick of this entire Pulitzer Who series. I have one more book to read to complete the Pulitzer Who series, and then I will begin a series that I'll call, reading as a writer, because I know a thing or two about that. But so we'll see what this next book, this last book for the Pulitzer Who series, shows us, and then at the end of that, I'll give my award, the Wonder Award for the books that I've read during this series, because I have to say, wonder is everywhere in this book. It's on every single page. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it's soft wonder, which in fact is often where wonder resides, in the quiet, subtle moments. All you have to do is look around and pay attention and find it where you are. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.